All right, we are live. Welcome on.
Mhm.
Gonna hang out for a little bit here, let the room populate before we officially start recording. But first, we have to make some faces for the YouTube thumbnail. So let's see if we can amuse everyone who is joining us here. All right, let's react to Jamal Mosley's lineup choices in the late third, early fourth quarter. You ready? All right, here we go. All right, very good. Okay, you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Well, our first, but hopefully not last and only Game 7 from these playoffs was in the books. It's our first series since 2018 where the home team won each game. Last 4 of those, in fact, involved the Boston Celtics. And we have our last entrant into the second round advancing to play those same Boston Celtics, the Cleveland Cavaliers. What did you take away in large part from this one, David?
For a lot of this contest, it did not look like the Cleveland Cavaliers were going to be the team that was coming out of this to face the aforementioned Boston Celtics. And the Magic came out strong. They got threes early. The Cavs couldn't buy a basket. And we'll talk about the start of the game because it matters even if this series is over. But when it swung hard. And you had a 15-point quarter for Orlando in the third. And I think that third quarter is really like it's the kind of the main story, I think, from the game, because it combined a couple of different things. One was Orlando's offense flatlining, but also you and I love talking about coaching. We love talking about kind of player usage and all that type of stuff. And while Jamal Mosley, had him in on my coach of the year ballot and he did a really nice job, the theory of the lineup is really important. And I think it was the end of the second, one coaching decision then, and then the lineups at the end of the third that really did bring the Cavs back in and then put the Cavs over the top.
Yeah, I think it was. I think I don't know that anything could have saved the Magic because their offense was so atrocious, and they don't have any offensive players that they could bring in. Now, I did think that they maybe could have stayed in it a little bit more with a better defensive effort, taking away the rim. I was very disappointed, as you alluded to, that Jamal Mosley, I thought, repeated his mistake, which didn't end up hurting him in game, I think it was in game 6, where he goes with Mo Wagner to replace Wendell Carter Jr., who gets his 4th foul in the third quarter. And we saw Mo Wagner together with Franz and Paolo, just like, well, okay, well, our center's in foul trouble. Everyone else, it's not time for them to go out yet, so we'll just put in our backup center. But that led to just having absolutely no rim protection. Donovan Mitchell goes crazy in that third quarter, in part due to that, although he was already on fire even before that. Probably should have gone with Jonathan Isaac there. I would say maybe he should have brought back Gary Harris and Jalen Suggs a little bit earlier in the fourth quarter as well, rather than going to the all bench. Maybe Cole Anthony should have played more over Markelle Fultz, and maybe Cole Anthony could have gotten them to a little bit better of an offensive performance in theory. But in the end, I mean, they were at one point 4 of 26 on jumpers in the second half. I mean, there was no way that they were going to get there. And a large part of that, in addition to just not having great shooting, was the Cleveland Cavaliers actually came to play, and particularly that they held it together after trailing at one point 49-31. They get back in contact in the second, and then Donovan Mitchell goes crazy in the third. He scored the second most points ever over a game 6 and a game 7 behind Allen Iverson back in 2001. And we said at the beginning of the series that, at least the reason I picked the Cavs, I guess you picked the Magic, but my thinking on that was that Donovan Mitchell was the best player in the series. And I was a little concerned about his health, and maybe he wasn't 100% all the way through, but he was good enough, particularly in these last 2 games, particularly in game 1, that he was the driving force. And then some of the Cavs roles players finally stepped up as well.
I brought up the third quarter as being an important swing point. And in that third quarter, the Orlando Magic scored 15 points. That's a story in and of itself. Donovan Mitchell scored 17. And like was the case in game 6, even though that was in a loss, most of that came inside the arc. And it ties in with this story that we've already talked about a little bit, which is Mitchell was a fantastic driver in this game, dribble penetrator. This one, more than game 6, it was also getting to the line. Mitchell had 17 free throw attempts, and I thought just about all of those were earned. And he also, got all the way to the basket. And part of what made that Orlando lineup, and Mitchell cooked better lineups too, but part of what made that late third lineup so galling was that it not only had Mo Wagner and no supplemental rim protection, it also only had one of their best perimeter guards, because Gary Harris, who did play after dealing with this hamstring issue and not playing in game 6, leaving game 5 early, he logged 27 minutes. I thought he looked better than I would have expected physically. But so what happened was the Cavs, their offensive process didn't have to be complicated to be devastating. It was basically either Mitchell beats Jalen Suggs, who competed defensively, but Mitchell had a great game, or you get somebody else onto him. There are different options there. And then Mitchell gets downhill and absolutely no one can stop him. And Mitchell was fabulous, 39 points, 11 of 27 from the field, and the aforementioned 15 of 17 from the line, plus 5 assists and only 1 turnover in his 45 minutes of action. He played real game 7 minutes. And so it's not only like theory of the lineups. We usually talk about in terms of like, oh, can you score or can you defend? And that's true. But what really bothered me about that, and why I wanted to kind of talk about it in the intro and then as we're getting into this, is because its specific weak points were tailor-made for Donovan Mitchell to exploit it, and exploited he did.
Yeah, that was true. And particularly the way he got to the line in the first end of the first half, and then in that third quarter was really devastating for Orlando. I don't know whether the carping by the Cavs and JB Bickerstaff about how they go to the foul line every single time, or they go to the basket every single time, and they were way lower on fouls. Everyone was getting a foul call in the first half, and then Mitchell was really the one in the second half as Banchero slowed down in the end and finished with 10 out of 28 from the field, but did get to 38 points, but only 2 assists because, they didn't make a jump shot. They didn't make a shot from anywhere, honestly. I didn't love that lineup, sure. And getting Harris back, I thought he looked pretty good, was useful but then not leaving one of Harris or Suggs on the floor at all times, I thought was definitely a problem. Harris did foul out in the end, though. The other thing, though, that really stuck out to me was just how awesome Evan Mobley was. And even when the Magic were going well in the first half, it was due to what I thought was unsustainable jump shooting. Now, did I believe that it would not only not sustain, but reverse into some of the worst jump shooting that we've ever seen, to the point where this is the worst field goal percentage in a game 7 since the Hornets back in 2016 in a blowout loss in Miami? No, I didn't think it would be quite that bad. But with the way that Mobley was really causing problems for them at the rim, to the point where they finished 11 of 27 in the restricted area and 3 of 16 upper paint. And
Oof.
a lot of those upper paint shots are not really great shots. It's not like they're just, flying down the lane, easy floater, Mobley's at the rim. They're not beating guys because you can't, when it's a lot harder to beat your man when you have to slow down at some point because you can't get all the way to the basket. And we saw that a number of times with Banchero being guarded by Isaac Okoro, where he kind of had him beat, particularly going left. And then Mobley was there, and Banchero just had to pull up, and he hit a few of those jump shots, but not enough of them in the end. And Orlando had just an atrocious second half on offense, and they scored a few points down the end when everyone was just fouling and being stupid. But they had, during the first 18 minutes of the second half, they scored 25 points, which was obviously, that's about what the Cavs scored in the first half during the first 18 minutes. So I thought Mobley was just unbelievable. And even Tristan Thompson was pretty good as well, backing him up. Ended up being +3 in 7 minutes. And that's a pretty cool thing about Mobley, as well as just his ability to play a ton of minutes. And they
Sure.
desperately needed that, of course, with Jared Allen unable to go again with this rib issue.
Mobley's rim protection was fantastic, and even though they didn't need him for much, Tristan Thompson was a positive as well. He not only had some good rim protection plays, but he also had a couple of screens. That was when Darius Garland, I thought, looked at his best. Was when he got loose, got a couple loose on a couple screens by Tristan
Yeah.
Thompson.
Well, he only had 3 field goals, so we're picking from limited moments there.
Yeah,
or he looked great getting to the rim, and then he would just like throw the ball off the backboard. I mean, some of those finishes were just inexplicably atrocious. There was like when there would be like nobody there really that he should have been concerned with.
And one of the nice things, we're recording this a fair amount after the game, is that we have some of the tracking stats can come in. Evan Mobley contested 17 twos and 20 shots overall. And I thought he earned all of that. And so you think about all the, Orlando shots around the basket. Yeah, those were mostly contested by Mobley. Most of those didn't go in. And it tied in with something that has been a concern / frustration for me throughout the series, that I watched a ton of Orlando Magic this year, in part because their games start at 4 Pacific, unlike most other teams. And their lack of transition play was a part of it. And so in this game, they actually got out a little bit more than they usually do. Didn't go well. They had an 82 offensive rating in transition. But part of what that does is that it allowed Evan Mobley to largely be in position. They weren't really bringing him out. They at times when the 3-point shooting, Carter hit a couple threes in the first half. You could do it a little bit there, but he was generally around the basket. They didn't have to use Mobley to guard Paolo Banchero. They were using Okoro. And as you mentioned, even if Okoro didn't do a perfect job, he was competing. He was trying to make Paolo work. There was someone else there. And so the most devastating possible shots, other than free throws, those weren't really on the repertoire. And so once the 3-pointers dried up, and by the way, Orlando, they were 3 of 15 on threes in just the second half. Actually, you know what? I'll take a beat to this. Here's Orlando's their shot chart, like their success rate in each area just in the second half of this game. And there is some garbage time that makes this look better than it was.
Yeah.
6 of 12 restricted area. 1 of 12 upper paint. 1 of 4 mid-range, and then that 3 of 15 from 3. By the way, in the entire contest, the Orlando Magic only attempted 3 corner threes.
Yeah, their offense definitely was not working very well. Early on, I thought they did a better job of using Banchero to attack some of the guards of the Cavs by setting more screens on the side. And I thought Cleveland did a better job with that, although it seemed like Orlando also kind of got away with it. Remember at the beginning of Game 6, they tried to go after those guards a little bit more. But because it was all happening from the top and they're able to just gap off of all these shooters, they weren't really able to get much this way. By putting it on the side, they were able to get Banchero going downhill. That's how he got a lot of his early scores and free throws. But once that dried up, they really did not have much at all. And I thought the Cavs deserved a ton of credit for that. We can start, obviously, with Mobley's performance, but recall that a lot of what they did the last couple of games with Allen out was Mobley on Banchero, and they largely stayed out of that matchup this time. They went with Isaac Okoro. They started him again over Marcus Morris, who didn't play at all in the second half and only played 7 minutes in the first. They didn't play Niang at all in the second half either. He's been the local whipping boy in Cleveland, and this time I thought had gone a little hard, but in this one he deserved it. He was -9 in 3 minutes, couldn't contain Banchero. But what Cleveland started doing, not only did they put Okoro out there, which allowed Mobley to stay closer to the rim, and Wendell Carter Jr. hit a couple of threes early in the first, but obviously wasn't able to space them out enough. I thought they actually probably should have involved Mobley in more actions than they did. I think they just tried to go at other guys, but that they could have maybe gotten some more pick and pop stuff, or maybe tried to get him involved in one thing and swing it to the other side, stuff like that. But Okoro, and then also even guys like Garland and Mitchell, when the Magic tried to run stuff in the second half, they just did a great job of funneling them into Mobley. All the stuff where they wanted to try to get middle, and the Magic could have maybe done some more handoff stuff to try to get middle. But like the one that really stuck out to me was Franz Wagner trying to attack Strus. Do you think it was an advantage matchup? But Strus wouldn't let him get middle off the screen. So he's forced in that traditional kind of ice coverage towards the baseline. And then he doesn't really have that maneuvering room that he loves going downhill against Mobley, where he can Euro step to either side, finish with either hand. He's just kind of trapped between the baseline and the backboard. And Mobley just stuffed him as he tried to do another one of these aggressive finishes. And Garland did a really nice job of that as well against Suggs or against Cole Anthony. And so the Magic just kept getting funneled into Evan Mobley, not really getting the Cavs particularly into rotation, not getting movement side to side, not getting the ball in a place where they had options to make passes. And as much as JB Bickerstaff is going to get a lot of criticism, and we joked about how that terrible challenge that he had in the first half could be his last challenge as Cavaliers coach, because given the reporting, he surely would have been fired had they lost this game to the Magic, particularly in the way that it looked like they were going to lose it maybe early in the first. But that is one thing that he has instilled. He's gotten much better defensive efforts out of a lot of people, like Karis LeVert is another one, who are not known as defensive players. Like, this was not a team, if you look at who was available today, that had some elite defensive talent outside of Mobley available. And maybe you could put Okoro in that category a little bit. And they played a really, really good defensive game, admittedly, against an offense that's not, any great shakes.
One of the other interesting, notable things that JV Bickerstaff went to was in the first half, they went to a zone when Markelle Fultz was on the floor, and I thought it worked well. That helped kind of slow some of Orlando's momentum. They couldn't really generate good shots there. Wasn't quite as prevalent in the second half. They also didn't need it because they were getting stops and buckets, and Orlando had to take the ball out of it. But nice to see a new, at least new from my recollection, tactical wrinkle in a Game 7. We saw a couple other the ones, the side pick and rolls and everything else. I want to talk. I want to talk a little bit about the second quarter, because I brought up the third as an important swing point in this game. But the second had both the high and the low from each team's perspective, kind of the harbingers of what was to come for Orlando. But it started with a horrendous beginning for the second quarter for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They didn't score for the first 3:34 of the quarter, and then they had only one other basket in the next 3.5 minutes. And that was the Garland only minutes that went really, really poorly. It was a 13-2 run at one point for the Orlando Magic during the stretch. And it was unsuccessful offensive process. Part of it was this was still in the stretch where the Cavs hadn't made a three in the entire game. They were 0 for their first 9. I think it was Merrill who hit the first one. I think Merrill made the only 2 3-pointers that the Cavs had in the first half, if memory serves. And
that was a good job by JB getting him in there to get the lid off the basket.
Sure. And so Garland, those were the roughest minutes, I think, for him, because they needed a lot of creation, and it wasn't really going well. But you did see a little bit of that Orlando offensive process. And then what that led into was the other part of the second quarter, which was Paolo Banchero was playing very well, but also they were, they used some of their offense for Franz Wagner, and Wagner picks up his third foul. And at that point, Wagner ended up having, and we'll talk about this, an absolutely horrendous game. But he picks up that third foul. It's a shooting foul on Donovan Mitchell with about 6 minutes to go in the quarter. At this point, before those free throws happen, the Magic are up. I think they're up 17 at that juncture. And then Wagner comes out because it's 3 fouls. Of course, the guy has to be removed from the game. And there were probably other reasons, including the Magic shooting over their heads in that very beginning of the game. Wagner comes out, and their offense completely flatlines. As I said, not entirely Franz Wagner being out, especially because he was terrible in this game. But it is a reminder of something, especially in Game 7. And there were a couple plays after that where Wagner was tentative, and there was one where he could have contested a Donovan Mitchell drive and just backed out of the way because he didn't want to get his fourth early in the third. But pulling him out, Wagner only plays 35 minutes in the game. That's less than Paolo and a few of the other guys. He finishes the game, 3 personal fouls. So it's hard to say that was the reason things were terrible. I mean, Franz Wagner didn't play well, everything else. But it is another one of those, you took the club out of your bag for a player who I don't think of as a particularly high foul guy. And even though Wagner wasn't great, he was still important for what they were doing. and having another player who could like handle an attack. So I don't know exactly. Like, I wanted to more note it rather than like say like, oh, Jamal Mosley did a terrible job there, but it was important.
Yeah, given the fact that they were up by quite a bit. Let me see, what were they up with when that happened? Yeah, I
17.
mean they're up 16 at that point, 42-26. So I understand that feeling like you have a little something to play with. And for another 2 minutes, it went okay. My bigger problem is that they subbed in John Isaac for him. That was what I didn't really get, because that's part of why things went downhill, right? Like
Sure.
Franz Wagner is a guard. Like, I mean, the fact that they would, particularly given how small Cleveland was, that they and their own inability to score, that they never thought about maybe going with a 3-guard alignment. That, surely Harris or Suggs could guard whoever the 3-man is on the Cavs. Like that's not too much of an issue.
Or Cole Anthony could, if that's who you're going to.
Right. Yeah. So I just didn't think that they had a great process there. And then they didn't use, because Isaac kind of struggled in that first role, then they don't use him at center. I just felt like that Jamal Mosley, maybe they could have figured out a way to win this series if he had just had a little bit more of a thought process and a theory of some of his lines. You recall back in games 1 and 2, I thought that the reason that starting Isaac over Wendell Carter Jr. was a big reason why they really struggled. Now, is that going to make up the 20 points that they were down in both of those games? Like, no, probably not. But the series definitely turned once they brought Carter Jr. back into his normal role. And I think Isaac, showed that he wasn't really capable of banging with Jared Allen. He had then also, they tried to use Isaac more as like a perimeter stopper. That didn't really work either. Like they probably played him too many minutes.
By the way, on that front, there was a stretch, as I brought up those minutes where it was Donovan Mitchell against Banchero, Wagner, and Mo Wagner, Franz, Mo Wagner, and Banchero, and Mitchell was crushing them. Then Jamal Mosley brings Jonathan Isaac in, but he doesn't use Jonathan Isaac as the rim protector. He uses Jonathan Isaac as the lead defender on Donovan Mitchell. And so you lose out on both things. Isaac is a better perimeter defender than most bigs. But he is not a perfect perimeter defender in those circumstances. So you also lose your rim protector as a rim protector. And it was just another piece of frustrating process, even if it was an imperfect roster to begin with.
Yeah, and you really saw Banchero and the Magic offense start to struggle as soon as Franz goes out. And Franz had a couple of 30-point games in this series, had a couple of games where he shot it okay, but I thought that this series in large part revealed a lot of his limitations. He was not being guarded by some unbelievable player. They put Okoro largely on Banchero when that was the matchup. They put Mobley on Banchero, and he was largely being guarded by Max Strus. And Max Strus maybe is a little bit underrated, and then they also, Franz Wagner, even though he's 6'10", he doesn't really have the kind of game where he uses his size, where he can attack smaller players as well. I thought it was very telling that everything had to be Banchero. And Wagner could be okay, maybe attacking on the second side, but I think his limitations as a shooter really caused a ton of problems for the Magic. Like, they kind of couldn't have him be at the top of the floor as easily, because then that would just lead to whoever was guarding him hanging out at the nail. So that led to a lot of problems. And he does use his size with his aggressive finishing, getting downhill, but he's reliant on a screen to get into that game, or being in the fast break, or attacking a closeout. Like, he doesn't really have any kind of a one-on-one game that you respect. He doesn't really have, like, tried to post him up a couple of times. It was clear that looked kind of awkward. He doesn't really feel comfortable rising up off of 2 feet for a mid-ranger, although he tried that once in this game. And so I think if he's, and then I also thought he got, I don't want to quite say exposed defensively, but he's not the kind of guy who can stay with a Garland or a Mitchell, and or even Karis LeVert, he would get beaten. Like, they were calling him up and going after him, and so I think, like, to me, he doesn't provide any rim protection either. Like, he's very young. He's got a lot of talent, a lot of ball skills, and playing on a floor with more spacing, he would be much more difficult to guard himself, although he's part of the problem because he doesn't provide any of that spacing either. So I thought that this series other than when he was able to really attack and transition in a couple of the games in Orlando, was not very good for Franz Wagner. I think he's got a lot of work to do on defense, with his help defense, with his ability to have some kind of a mid-range game, a post game. And then I also think he needs to rework his shot. It's too slow getting it off. And of course, it's not that accurate either. So he's a good free throw shooter. You would think he should be better than this in theory as a shooter, though you nor I have ever like particularly thought that his jumper looked that good from the outside. But kept getting asked in the chat, like, all right, auto max for him. It's like, let's see on that. It may end up happening, but I'm not sure that's the smartest decision. It may end up happening simply because of the rising cap environment, but worth noting that that'll kick in
for his contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, because his contract, his new contract, whether it's restricted free agency or an extension, will be in 25, which is we expect to be a 10% bump, whatever the cap is in 24. And so Franz Wagner is a challenge for me in some ways, because I was extremely low on him, both on the film when we did a scouting prospect on him, and when I saw him in Summer League. I just thought he wasn't a good player. And he has been significantly better than that, and has been like a legitimately positive guy. So it is important to acknowledge those successes and the role that he can have. However, there is a part of what has happened over the last year for me where it's not in any way, shape, or form a vindication of how I felt before, because he is a significantly better player. But whether I misevaluated him or evaluated that film correctly, and he's been better since. But the problem that I saw, I think, in that film, and that is bearing out a little bit now, is my question about what Franz Wagner's ideal role is on a team that has expectations. Now, it's important to acknowledge that Franz Wagner has been a part of what has led the Magic to having those expectations, and that is important to acknowledge. However, he's kind of occupies the strange space where it's like he's a capable team defender. He has been a part of a successful defense, but he's not a defensive playmaker, and he's not a great man-to-man defender, and he's not a great rim protector. He can be a part of a capable offense, but he's not a great on-ball player. He's, shot is questionable for being comfortable. So it becomes this thing where Wagner, unless he takes a dramatic step forward in something like off-ball shooting, you need somebody better than him offensively. That's been my operating theory for the Magic for a while now. And maybe that player is Paolo Banchero. Maybe that player is TBD edition X. But then if you do that, Wagner becomes more efficient, but he also becomes smaller, and the shooting deficiencies, if they don't improve, become more of an issue. So I don't think it's a big problem, because I don't know if the Magic have the juice to be, at least in their current construction, to be a team good enough for that to really, really matter. Though, I mean, they did finish as the 5 seed. They were competitive in the series. So Wagner's only 22. There's still plenty of time for him to improve. He's already so much better than I thought he was going to be. But you brought up the 25% max and all of those types of things. And Orlando, we're not doing their offseason preview right now. We'll do it at some point in the next few weeks. They're about to get more expensive. They're about to have tough decisions. This is the part. I'm not saying drafting well and all those things are easy, but you don't have to make the prioritization and the identification of what do we need around it. The early part is just, let's draft the best players we can. Let's see if we can make it work. Ideally, we get the right coach. And now those evaluations are going to start mattering, because not only is it paying these guys their extensions, it's what do we need around them?
Yeah, and the idea of Franz as your second best player on a really good team is he's certainly not there yet. Will he get there? We'll see. Let's hit a few questions here.
Sure.
Middle Endian says Joe Ingles was +6. I guess in response to me saying that he shouldn't have played as much. Now, that helped. It helped that he got to go against George Niang in the first half. That was not the case. I did think that Cleveland probably should have attacked him more than they did. But you can't. And I thought actually the one thing that Ingles did do was he was the one guy guarding Okoro who actually made him shoot. And I can't remember, did he even make a shot? I mean, Okoro was 0 of 2 from 3. You definitely needed to make him take more. And he actually was +24 in his 33 minutes. So but other than that, I mean, you can't point to anything that Ingles was doing well. And you can't only look at it in the playoffs, particularly like a game 7 of, all right, we put this guy out there and he didn't kill us. It's, well, what would the other guy that you put in for him have been doing?
Sure.
Right? Like every single minute that you're putting someone on the floor is an opportunity to go win the game, as opposed to an opportunity to just not lose the game. And Ingles, they didn't kill him. That's the best you can say about it. It still doesn't make it, I think, a good decision. Truth says, I was hoping the Magic could pull it out since I wanted to see their defense against Boston. Their offense is going to be comically bad against them. Yeah, and so might the Cavs, quite honestly.
Sure.
But yeah, I thought Orlando would, in fact, have given Boston a better series. They just have more athleticism, could have done some switching, made things hard. Like I actually think Boston might have struggled to score against them. We'll see whether that's the case against Cleveland or not.
I have one from Matthew Gibbs. Does the series make you reconsider your evaluation of Jonathan Isaac's defense? He was not quite the destroyer I expected to be. A little bit. I mean, Isaac was incredible on defense over the regular season. Some of that was being put in positions that weren't as successful, like whether that is this kind of the starting center stuff was a little awkward. And then some of the second unit, I brought up my criticism of how Mosley used him in the first half of game 7, or second half of game 7, apologies. So yeah, the idea that he's going to be the, that guy every possession of every game. That's, and you and we haven't said like, oh, they should start Jonathan Isaac or anything like that. But he did have a worse series than I hoped and expected. And when you consider some of Cleveland's limitations, I hoped he could do better.
Yeah, I would say it would make me reevaluate it a little bit. Now, he did at least make it through the series healthy, right? Like, he was able to play a bunch of minutes early on. But I think I said to John, even I thought he could be all defense caliber, even in the defensive player of the year conversation, if he could just play more minutes. And whether it was playing those more minutes or whether he was just put in different positions out on the floor. Also at center, we thought he could be really, really impactful. He just wasn't that as well. So yeah, I would say I am lower on it after this series.
And then we got asked, from a deal, was this a well-played series? Not particularly to me. I mean,
on defense, it was.
On defense, it was
like the top 5 defenses in the league, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true. But there were a lot of times where it's like they're just missing a ton of shots. But the execution that was there. So well played. I think it was it showed the limitations to some extent, and also we got to. I'm happy at the end of the series, and as you mentioned, in game 1, we got to see some really strong Donovan Mitchell performances, and now we get to see Donovan Mitchell in another series.
Well, and you got to say this is a big missed opportunity for Orlando, considering Jared Allen didn't play the last 3 games of the series, and they lost 2 of those games, both of which were close-ish, although obviously this wasn't close.
Oh, one other quick.
So I would not say that. I would say that the Cavs probably played about as well as they could have, given who was available. I don't believe that about the Magic, and particularly just the way the Magic shot the ball was atrocious.
Games 3 and 4 were not the Cavs playing as best they can, but that's only a portion of the series. But those were pretty abysmal. One other quick Jamal Mosley thing. I think he gave way too much trust to Markelle Fultz, and Fultz he's not as good right now, at least in this series defensively, to justify his obvious offensive limitations. And so there were stretches where, like we talked about the zone in the first half, where he's just not at that level. And like there are circumstances where necessity puts players in tough positions, but I thought they could have gone more with Cole Anthony, structured things a little bit differently, and been okay. And instead they leaned on Fultz. And I'm not saying the -13 in a game that they lost by 12 is like all the losses on that, but it's another one of those, like, really you're trusting him over someone else.
How do you think my prediction that JB was kind of a year ahead of Jamal Mosley in his playoff development as a coach turned out?
Not too bad. I think that Bickerstaff was more willing to move off of his priors. In some ways, that was helped by some of the absences and just having to reshuffle. You have to reevaluate things differently. But I thought that Bickerstaff overall did a pretty good job seeing, like, not sticking to his guns when it was clear that those weren't working. And that was one of my big problems with Mosley. And the one that I'll bring up with that was I was trashing this lineup where they were playing, like, the theory of it the third quarter. They're getting crushed. Call a timeout. same guys come back in. I don't think JB Bickerstaff makes that mistake.
Yeah, and I thought he did a decent job. Like, he got a good game out of Marcus Morris in game 5. Then he started him. It's like, oh, nope, it's not. He's his legs are completely dead again. We're just not going to go in that direction. He goes back to Okoro. In this game, he sees that, all right, in game 5, it worked to put Evan Mobley on Banchero because they were just trying to bash their head against the wall. In game 6, they got some offensive rebounds down the end, so he didn't go with Mobley on Banchero in this game. That's part of why he went back to Okoro, and Okoro, in the end, played relatively well. And so I thought that they, and even to survive, a pretty shitty series from Garland, other than 2 games, that George Niang just wasn't able to be effective. And I thought, like, they needed him. They tried to get some things out of him, and they just weren't able to do that. But I thought he tried him an appropriate amount. Some people might have said, oh, well, maybe he cost him the game 7 by playing him for 3 minutes and he was -9. I don't know about that. He was going up against a Magic all bench unit. They hadn't hit a 3-pointer in the entire first quarter, so they needed someone who could shoot. And I thought he dusted off Merrill enough that, it didn't really allow Orlando to kind of like know that he was going to be in the lineup and like come up with a plan to attack him. The zone was pretty good. And whereas I thought that Mosley was just a little, trusting Fultz, Anthony was just someone that they needed to get something from in this series. And the one game that they did, they won that game. And I just felt like he was the one guy who didn't just get a crazy amount of rope. So I thought Mosley made a lot of mistakes. I'd be hard pressed to point to that many that JB made in the end. And particularly when you consider, like LeVert, for example, in game 6, just like was terrible in the first half, didn't go back to him. But then LeVert actually saved them, I thought, in this game in the second quarter with some of those drives that he had. And so he just was able to find guys who could do enough in enough games with Allen out, with Dean Wade completely unavailable. Dean Wade would have been a huge player in this series for the Cavs, guarding Banchero and Wagner, and the Cavs just, I mean, the Cavs had 4 players available that you trusted by the end of this series, and JB still got onto the finish line. And also They held it together emotionally down 18 in game 7. Dan noted this. This is the biggest comeback in game 7 in the play-by-play era, which is the last 25 years. So I thought
incredible.
Yeah, I thought JB coached a pretty good series, given what was available to him. Like, the offense was clunky. Both offenses were clunky, not only in their lack of shooting, but the lack of execution and not really flowing from action to action and not that creative. But I thought JB did do enough things, like involving Strus and screening actions, to where he was able to get Mitchell free in the second half. So I thought he was decent. All right, I'm going to actually pick Matthew Gibbs. Come on down for a free year of Dunc'd On Prime. Email dunkedonprime@gmail.com. Anyone who tells me that I should reconsider my evaluation and ask me about it, and he is correct. It was time to reconsider that. So we do adjust our priors on this show, despite what some people might say. So Matthew, I've seen you around for a while here. I'm glad to offer you a free year's subscription to Dunc'd On Prime. Should we get right into this Boston-Orlando? Or I wish it was Boston-Orlando. This Boston-Cleveland series?
We can. And this is going to be an adjustment for the Cleveland Cavaliers to face the Boston Celtics, who also have a very good defense, but unlike the Orlando Magic, also have a very good offense. And I actually do, though, want to start with, we usually do these structures of when each team has the ball as the kind of the basis. And Jalen Suggs is a wonderful defender. You will not hear me disparage him in any way. One of the challenges that Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and the Cavs are going to go through with Boston is the volume of quality defenders they have for perimeter players. And so Kristaps Porzingis, functionally, I am treating him as out for this entire series. I think that is a reasonable stance to take. That is going to hurt Boston in a variety of different ways. But still having Drew Holiday, still having Derek White available in the rotation, and then, most of the other perimeter players, like whether that's having somebody like Jaylen Brown guard down, or whether that's, bringing Peyton Pritchard in, or any of the other things they can do, the lack of weak points for the Celtics defensively is going to create a lot of problems for the Cavs offense.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there. And I'm interested even like how much would they consider switching? Certainly 1 through 4. I think they'll feel very comfortable with that. Now, Al Horford on Mitchell, are they willing to go there? I mean, they have so many different coverages that they can try. Certainly, they can go 2 on the ball against Mitchell. If try to force Evan Mobley coming downhill to make a play against some of these guards reaching in. They don't have the amazing rim protection of Porzingis. I think if they had Porzingis, that might have been their default strategy to start with. All right, Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, you got to make a play going 2-on-1 against Porzingis, like we saw them fail to do so many times, memorably in the playoffs last year. I mean, we can talk about Allen's health status in a second, but that's going to be my question number one is Donovan Mitchell, and then, of course, even more so, Darius Garland, like, are they going to actually be able to beat anyone? Like, what can the Cavaliers do that's going to force, that can really cause Boston to react defensively, that's going to open up the rim? And then you throw into that, how is Cleveland going to guard all these guys from Boston on the other end? And I know we're talking about when Cleveland has the ball, but they're going to have to put some defensive players out there, right? Like, looks like Dean Wade's not going to play in the series. Like, Okoro has to play. Like, they don't, or Levert, he can't shoot either. I mean, I think Strus can, like, semi-hold up, but they don't really, like, if they put Niang out there, he's going to get worked. So they don't, Merrill, same thing for him. Maybe they can get away with some of those guys when when Boston goes to lineups that don't have as many ball handlers who can attack. I think that you got to really spot in some of your shooters when they go to like a Pritchard or a Sam Hauser, for example. But it just, when you consider, I'm not even sure how many, I mean, I think maybe one is the answer, but even I don't know how many, Donovan Mitchell going 1-on-1 against Derek White or Drew Holiday, like, is he able to cook that guy? If they run a pick and roll and Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum get switched on him, can Donovan Mitchell even like destroy Al Horford? Well, maybe not, because Al Horford is going to have all this help behind him off of all these non-shooters for the Cavs. And then the Cavs, particularly with only one big, are not really going to do much on the offensive glass. So you're not that worried about having Horford switched on in the perimeter. So I really, really think the Cavaliers are going to struggle to score in this series.
Darius Garland had some brutal games against Orlando, and they changed up the matchups into his guarding. I mean, the overall numbers on Garland in the 7-game series actually aren't horrendous. It was 55% true shooting on 21.5 usage, but there were some truly terrible
21.5 usage. How is that so low? They have nobody else who can do anything.
Because there were times where he was this like sole creator out there, but it wasn't fantastic. We've been said this was a rough series for Darius Garland. It's probably going to get worse, because I brought up how the Celtics have so many guys to defend Donovan Mitchell. Part of why the Celtics are so nasty for teams that are limited is because their second best perimeter defender or second best guard defender is still better than almost everybody else's first best. And so there is no let up. There is no, like, you're not going to get anything there. And then the other part, as you brought up with the switching, is that it's not like you can run a low resistance thing and get into a matchup that you can finesse. I mean, I don't think that Darius Garland is going to torch Jason Tatum at all. And so the circumstances where they're going to generate an advantage, even with playing one big, and talked about how the combination of Allen and Mobley can really short circuit Cleveland's offense. Playing against Boston will short circuit Cleveland's offense all by itself.
Yeah, I don't love it. And then also not having Jared Allen to get some offensive rebounds. The fact that he wasn't able to play these last 3 games, and then this series is going to be on an every other day basis going forward as well.
It's a great
And
point.
you're still talking about how he can't get his arm above his head, and whatever the injury is, a rib contusion. It sounds like something that is probably maybe kind of a 2-week sort of injury. And then when he comes back, like, how effective is he going to be able to be? I'm guessing not that much. And he's reliant on, as a center who's not some like amazing skill guy, although he has good touch around the rim, to on his physicality to be effective. And it's not like he can just go out there and shoot some jumpers. He's got to get in there and mix it up and be able to jump and extend out as well. So I mean, I think my guess would be maybe we see him at some point in the series, but I don't expect him to be at the same level. It'll probably be on a minutes limit coming back. I don't even know how much cardio he's able to do right now to stay in shape, and not having that vertical gravity. I think that's something that, where against this Boston team that's a little smaller, particularly without Porzingis, they might have been able to take advantage of Allen's ability to go up and make plays or finish around the rim against smaller players or get some offensive rebounds. Like, Evan Mobley is not that guy as a finisher. And so I think like they're not worried about Evan Mobley, even like in pick and roll. They might throw him an alley-oop, but he's like, Evan Mobley gets off the ground quick, but he doesn't get that high, it seems like, in the way Allen does. And so he's not going to have that vertical gravity that can suck in the backside and then get you open threes on the weak side. And that's probably going to be someone who the Cavaliers don't necessarily want shooting that ball anyway.
It's a challenging proposition, and there isn't a whole lot that can change it other than some of their more limited guys shooting the lights out. I mean, how will we, like, you some of the one-way guys for the Cavs, like, they're going to have to make decisions here, like Merrill and Okoro, and Boston threatens you both directions, so those guys are going to be harder to play, but you're going to have to, and George Niang obviously is in that camp too. You're going to have to play some of them, but which ones and when are going to be there? And Boston also, like, maybe Jared Allen, if he could come back, or Evan Mobley could make some plays on the short roll or doing that. But Boston's not going to be giving them as many 4-on-3s because they don't need to. They're not stressed out enough to, like, you could force the ball out of Donovan Mitchell's hands, but you're not doing that because you're so terrified of the guys who are guarding him getting cooked. You're doing it because you don't think the other guys can beat you.
Yeah, and I also just don't think that Cleveland is going to be able to get up as many threes as Miami was. And I think Boston also kind of learned their lesson about letting guys shoot some of these dare shots and over helping in that Miami series against an inferior team. But there's so many tactics I think that Boston can go to with all the versatility that they have. Now, maybe you'd say if they put Cornette and Hauser in, or Pritchard and Cornette in, and Cornette is going to be someone who's going to be in a drop coverage. But of course, the Cavs also don't have the most intricate offense. Like, are they even going to be able to get Horford or Cornette to be the one that's involved in the pick and roll, right? They're going to pre-switch stuff, hang out towards the baseline. The Cavs don't have this like amazing continuity offense. They don't have this amazing ability to recognize situations and then bring another guy into the action to screen as well. Okay, well, that's fine. That's now Isaac Okoro. You could always just put Al Horford or Luke Cornette on Isaac Okoro to begin with. All right, you want to run a pick and roll with Isaac Okoro and have him be the roll man? Like, for God's sake, be my guest. So I think there's really the Cavs are going to struggle immensely, I would say. Now, the question is, can they make Boston struggle? I think they're just a little bit too small, and like they're not really able to play like kind of that big bully ball that might cause problems. Mobley, I think, could certainly be an issue for them, but they have the ability to space him out as well. And so I think if you're, a lot of times you can do that same thing where you just put Al Horford in the strong side corner, you drive. All right, you want to force him towards the baseline? Go ahead. We'll just throw it to Al Horford wide open for a corner three. So like all the like kind of ice coverage stuff that they're doing, forcing guys into Mobley, keeping guys on the side, directing the ball, like that's just not going to matter as much when you have a big who can pop out and make plays the way Boston does. And if this were Porzingis, I think the Cavs would really be drawing dead. I do think there might be times when Boston is just not going to shoot that well, but they have so much more firepower from the perimeter. And the Cavs basically have one, maybe two defenders that you trust to guard Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and even Drew Holiday. I think the Cavs might have some decent defensive games in the series, but I don't think for the bulk of the series, I don't expect this to be a situation where Boston's like shut down or anything.
There will be some moments, as you said, the shooting or Mobley at the rim could make a difference. And I think there will definitely be some quarters where Boston, things get a little bit tight, and that could even be at the Garden early in this series, potentially.
Yeah.
But one of the other concerns I have about this iteration of the Cavs against the Celtics is without Dean Wade, the overall kind of length and strength at the 3 and the 4. So Max Strus, he defends ably for a 3. But actually, as you combine that also with Garland and Mitchell. So Jaylen Brown, he's not getting all the way downhill to make baskets if Evan Mobley's there, but he's going to be able to create advantages. And if they react to that, he can make passes off of that. And Tatum, so Tatum, we saw Okoro battle with Banchero, but it's a different thing when you have Evan Mobley behind you versus the spacing with Al Horford potentially being in the strong side corner. And so those guys having the forwards that Boston has versus the forwards that Cleveland has, that's going to be a challenge. And if you say, oh, okay, Okoro fights better, he does a better job than we expect in that series, well, then it could be Drew Holiday on Mitchell or Garland, or it could be Derek White, who just had a fabulous close to the series against the Heat against Mitchell or Garland. They have a lot of players that can cook you even without Porzingis.
Yeah, and they just had some experience in the last series going at Tyler Hero. I don't think there's any Mobley is pretty good. He's a different sort of defender than Bam Adebayo, but they're not going to put Mobley on Jason Tatum. I think it could be an interesting defensive wrinkle, but part of the reason that worked, even Bam Adebayo is not someone who's going to like get over a screen necessarily guarding someone. Like they put Bam Adebayo on Tatum a lot of times to switch him off of Tatum if there was any kind of screening action. And so, yeah, sure, Mobley, absolutely. I think he could contain anyone on the Cavs in a one-on-one situation. And I'm sure, particularly if they just start and getting killed on threes, maybe JB will go to some of that. If they are able to bring in Jared Allen and Mobley, I think then we will see a lot more switching. I think if they had both of those guys, I would actually feel pretty decent about their ability to guard this Boston team. But particularly with Allen, can he really move his feet on the perimeter? What you'd do is you'd probably switch whoever it was, Allen or Mobley, onto the ball handler in the initial action, and knowing that you still had the other guy behind who could potentially make a play, and then you trust your rotations behind that. But I think with only one big and then you're playing a 3 basically as your 4, they just they run out of length. They're also just the ability to close out on driving kicks. They just don't have enough length to like run guys off the line really. And I think that's going to be a big issue. So I think Boston will have a couple of games maybe where Mobley has a big impact. They don't get much at the rim. Maybe the jumper is off and they struggle to score a little bit. Like that's a possibility. I also think that Boston is a way better transition team than Cleveland. Obviously a way better transition team than Orlando. And they're going to be getting a lot of stops and they'll be throwing it ahead with White, getting some transition threes, hitting it to Jaylen Brown on that right wing. I think, and if Cleveland doesn't have Evan Mobley back, then those Boston players are going to be able to just go right to the rim in transition.
Anything else we should discuss, or are we ready to make picks?
Going Boston in 5. And the only reason I'm doing that, well, number 1 is that Porzingis is out, but number 2 is just that Boston just never sweeps. I'm never picking a Boston sweep, no matter how lowly the opponent is, until they actually do it.
The Boston Celtics have only swept one opponent since the bubble. And when you consider their quality during that time and some of the series that they've had an opportunity to sweep, and that was against Brooklyn a couple of years ago, I'm still picking Celtics in 4. If Jared Allen were available, if Dean Wade were available, I would be more confident in the Cavs to win games in the series, to be successful in quarters and halves in the series. I just don't think they have the juice. And Cleveland facing an opponent that was weirdly kind of in some ways similar to where Cleveland is right now, maybe gave them enough reps. And I think that Spoelstra is a better coach. Miami didn't have better talent, but in some ways they understood their talent a little bit better there. So like you, I'm extremely reluctant to pick a Celtics sweep, but I am actually going to pick it.
Okay, there we go. This series, I am highly excited. Actually, let's see if we have a couple of comments on what we were saying there in that series. Not enough offense. Deal says Boston in 6. Most people saying they agree Boston in 5. Garland and Mitchell have to deal with the nonstop rotation of amazing perimeter defenders. Not gonna be fun for them. I only actually think of 2 of Boston's defenders as like unbelievable one-on-one, and even maybe not unbelievable in the case of Jalen Brown. But I think it'll probably be Brown and Drew Holiday who get the initial assignments on Garland and Mitchell. And Tatum, usually they don't put him in. He'll switch, obviously, but he's more of a nail defender. And then White, I think, is also probably better as a help defender than an on-ball guy. Brown is the guy that I think, maybe even more than Holiday, that they like to put on the other team's best offensive player, because everyone else is really good as a help defender and Jaylen Brown isn't. So why not have him just be the guy who's going to be glued to someone on the ball? They'll switch, obviously, plenty also. But I do think like White guarding Mitchell, I actually think Mitchell, might be able to beat him one-on-one. I don't know that White is like an elite one-on-one type of defender, but then there's also the issue of Mitchell's health as well.
Well, and all the help around the basket and everything else.
All right. Not too many comments on this one because I don't think people are that interested, but I do think people are going to be very interested in this next series, OKC Dallas.
Oh, actually, I wanted one more prediction before we move on.
Okay.
How much of Cavs Celtics will we do on playback?
Yeah, I think it'll probably be in either it's the only game that night and we're feeling spry, or all right, I'll turn it on. Because we might just be doing the late game, because both series are awesome, right? So we'll turn it on if it's close after the third quarter.
My prediction is 1 fourth quarter. But I could be wrong there. And Cleveland could keep it close, but I'm going to say 1 fourth quarter that we do. And maybe one other crunch time.
And now that they're down Porzingis, if Boston suffers another injury like that, you never know on the health stuff.
But now let's get to a series that we will do a lot of on playback. Mavericks-Thunder.
It starts tomorrow, right? Or is it Tuesday?
It starts on Tuesday. Because we'll get game 1 or game 2 of Minnesota Denver, which
we'll also be doing on playback.
Which will also be doing on playback
for that matter.
Yes. And yeah, you could simulcast. You could check it out there, and it's easier for those of you who don't use VPNs. It's easier to sync up, because if we're ahead of you, then you can delay us using that. But let's get to Mavs Thunder, and I'll make it your choice. Do you want to start with when the Thunder have the ball or when the Mavs have the ball? Because they're both a whole lot of fun to discuss.
Let's start with when the Thunder have the ball. And I think that is going to be the thing to me. I think the Thunder can do a decent job of slowing down Dallas. So can Dallas do a decent job of slowing down the Thunder? And of course, we got the sad news that Maxi Kleber is going to miss this series. He's going to be reevaluated in 2 weeks. He did, in fact, it sounded like, separate his shoulder on that fall when he was not even undercut, but just shoved in the air by Amir Coffey, which they never even looked at. But I do have this theory that because KP wrote this great article about this, he updated it a bit ago with all the injuries, of just that very few All-Stars would miss time during the playoffs back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and now they do. And there are many reasons to believe, whether it's playing more at the lower levels, specializing in one sport, the demands of running up and down, higher possession counts, there's more miles traveled, more cutting, more Euro steps, but is generally the game being played over a larger area, higher speed. But I actually think a significant portion, not 50%, mind you, but maybe like 10 or 20% of guys, the increase in injuries is just from charges and trying to take charges. I mean, you think about like just Giannis last year and Kleba this year, for example, like if the charge rule is fixed, you don't have guys just getting bridged, flying into the air and getting hurt. And like that happens a lot. So I think it's really sad to see Kleba out. I thought he was a key figure in this series. So with him not available now, I would imagine the Mavs are going to go pretty much exclusively with Gafford and Lively out there. Maybe they go PJ Washington at center if one of those guys gets in foul trouble. But can they defend, and how will they defend the Thunder, assuming that they're going to have a traditional center on the floor most, if not all, the time?
It's a major challenge, and the Thunder present that because they play not only 5 guys who could shoot, but honestly guys who can do a little bit with the ball in their hands. And so that makes playing a more traditional center like Gafford, like Lively, a lot harder for the Mavericks to bear. And one of the other reasons why that's going to be a huge problem for Dallas is because they don't get a lot of supplemental rim protection from their other guys. Even if, I mean, maybe at times with Derrick Jones Jr., depending on who he's defending, where we might see him in times where he can't even get close because he's on Shea or he's on somebody else. But there isn't a great place to hide a Derek Lively, a Daniel Gafford, not only starting 5 versus starting 5, but honestly against the Thunder in pretty much the whole series, because big Jalen Williams can shoot too.
Yeah, that's the problem. And they may even come out in this alignment, but you imagine pretty quickly it'll go to putting the center on Josh Giddey. And if they don't put the center on Josh, if Josh Giddey has to leave the game, then the Thunder get a lot smaller. If they go with Isaiah Joe, then maybe that's going to give Dallas a place to attack in the other end. So I actually think, and Giddey, of course, is going to get attacked plenty as well.
Sure.
Defensively, him on Doncic seems, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, Giddey is, maybe he's just like so slow that he can actually stay in front of Doncic. But he also has like, yeah.
It might also be like there's this idea like of there are different ways that you can be good and bad at defense, that the way that Josh Giddey is limited on defense, and he has made strides, isn't the way that Luke is going to attack as much as some of the other guys. I think it's possible.
Yeah, but then Irving obviously is
who can that's
go
a different
at him
thing
as well. And the Mavs also personnel-wise, like they're going to need to get more out of Dante Exum in the series. Josh Green's going to play more. Like Josh Green will be their backup 4 basically now with Kleba out. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and one other thing on Josh Giddey, like, yes, he is still an extremely limited shooter. He's been better since the All-Star break, just even watching him. And if you look at the stats, 32.5% pre-All-Star break, 36% post. I think his frequency went up too. Like, I'm not saying you want to build the whole offense around it, but the idea that Dallas can make their defense survive by leaving Josh Giddey open on every possession, there will be at least some stretches where they get burned by that, because we saw it happen in various other, not only playoffs in the like there were sometimes with the Pels, but also like just significant games within the regular season.
Yeah, for Oklahoma City's offense, Shea and Jalen Williams both had some tweaks in the first round. They are not on the injury report, so hopefully Shea will be back to full strength. He was limited in Game 4, though he was able to finish it out against the Pels. How they're going to deal with him is going to be massive. They might even consider starting Kyrie Irving on him. Guessing it'll probably be Derrick Jones, so then I guess it's PJ Washington on J-Dub. Like, that's probably how they start. I do think Irving actually, just in a straight up ISO against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like, might be okay. I think like Kyrie's in pretty good shape. He's got quick feet. He's strong for just a regular point guard. Now he may get exhausted trying to do that a ton. Maybe that's something they do at the end of the game. But then, of course, what happens when they screen? What happens? And they're quite willing to have, even if you do put your center on Josh Giddey, to have him just screen for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Jalen Williams and be the role man, and then he can make a decision out of that, and they'll just space Chet out. Obviously, Dort and Chet and Giddey are going to need to make shots in the series. Aaron Wiggins as well. Like, Dallas surely is going to really test out every member of the Thunder's roster and force them to make some open shots. Like, Dort, to me, came through with flying colors in the first round. We'll see about that in this round. You know, but he's really done it all season. He's one of the most improved shooters in the league. With Lively, maybe they consider some switching. I think we'll probably see like some switch doubling as well. I don't think they want to switch with Gafford. You know, he's going to try to be in more of a drop coverage. I think we'll probably even see like some zone at times. But then also your trump card, if you're OKC, is Luka getting switched on to Jalen Williams or Shai. And Luka held up totally fine against James Harden and Paul George, and to the limited extent he was out there, Kawhi Leonard. But that's because Luka is pretty strong. Luka has no chance of moving his feet to stay with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I probably think same with Jalen Williams. Like, those guys are just too sudden for him, and it's going to be a blow by. So then they're probably going to have to end up putting two on the ball in those circumstances as well. And there's going to be a lot of spacing behind them. So I thought Dallas defended the Clippers well. I thought the Clippers were a perfect matchup for the way Dallas wanted to play because they couldn't space the floor. I think that other than maybe Boston, that this OKC team is maybe the worst defensive matchup for Dallas in the whole league.
Dallas, as you mentioned, extremely fortunate that the Clippers, especially the version of the Clippers that they got to play, they had these limited guys out there. And so that made life easier. And I want to give Kyrie Irving in particular a lot of credit. He played better defensively in that series than I expected. He has generally done a better job this year. He has grown as a defender over the course of his career. The Thunder are a whole different animal. And they will challenge Aaron Wiggins and various other players to make their threes. But broadly speaking, that has not been a successful gambit for teams overall this year. And one of the other challenges that the Thunder present compared to other teams is that doing so doesn't necessarily take everything away. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you bring an extra person to the action, like you could still get something else good of it. It's like, oh, you take that Isaac Okoro 3 and that's the end of it. Like, they can get to other things. They could theoretically, they can draw fouls, and that fouling is actually another, for me, important challenge for Dallas defensively. And it's Luka in particular. He is not the greatest at navigating foul trouble. He can pick up cheapies, and the Thunder can generate those. And I think Mark Daigneault is going to do a better job than some coaches at understanding when those situations come to pass. And this may be something a little later in the series once they get a clearer sense of the tendencies. Now, the Mavericks and Thunder are very familiar with each other. These iterations have been around for a little bit now, but I think that the Thunder present challenges that Dallas isn't ready for.
Yeah, the other thing too is Luka as the low man, not having any kind of, as you noted, secondary rim protection. But, you know, if Shai gets past the first line of defense, and particularly if they're forced to put two on the ball, and one of those guys isn't Luka, like if they have to put two on the wall at the center, once the ball gets over the top, like they're fucked. They're giving up an open three. I think that Dallas is definitely like they are a pretty solid defensive team. Like, they have some good defenders, but I wonder about, particularly then, if they're going to be able to score on the other end, which I'm not so sure they're going to like go crazy scoring in this series. That if they want to be able to score on the other end, I think, you know, and we'll see also if Tim Hardaway Jr. comes back in, like they may end up needing his shooting, but I'm also concerned that he's someone who can get totally destroyed. He's not a good help defender. Like, they're going to have to be on like such a string defensively that I think they're just eventually they're going to just like run out of bodies.
While we're on this side of the ball and running out of bodies, I think there will be a place for Dante Exum in the series. He can defend on the perimeter. He can provide some energy. And I think that Dallas will need his impetus at points offensively. So I think he has a part in this series. I wonder how much latitude Jason Kidd is going to give him. They distinctly did not have much in the Clippers series, but this is a different opponent and it is a different context.
So the other end of the floor, we saw what a crazy effect Chet Holmgren had on the New Orleans Pelicans offense. They famously shot 9 of 35 on shots around the basket with him contesting. And that's the other area where Kleba not being around could be big trouble, because that's going to allow him to stay closer to the rim. Now, Luka is the best there's ever been, maybe, at getting downhill, being a threat with the floater, and then also being able to find the big with the alley-oop or a little lay-down pass. So that's going to be quite the tete-a-tete. Are they going to try to actually play Luka Doncic 2-on-2 in the pick and roll? Nobody ever does that, basically, right? So now Derek Jones Jr., who absolutely is going to have to be out there for his defense, you would think, is someone that they can help off of. They have other guys like Jalen Williams and Shea who can be really disruptive on the back line in addition to Chet. So I think that they might feel comfortable even putting 2 on the ball with Luka. I think they're going to try to do a lot of pre-switching as well to keep Chet on the back line. Chet has a lot of mobility. I would even think, maybe even late in games, about just getting a look here and there of what it looks like to have Chet Holmgren switched on to Luka Doncic.
Sure.
Or and maybe even Kyrie Irving. I don't know if I would necessarily want to go there as much. I think Luka maybe more so, and Chet can kind of use his length to contain. As particularly, the other problem for Luka is he hasn't been as healthy, right? He's got this knee sprain. His step back was not working at all. So if he's not going to be able to hit that shot, you do feel a lot more comfortable switching him, and you feel just a lot more comfortable in general switching whoever you're going to switch onto him. Now, Luka, certainly if it's Shea switching onto him, he's going to cook that. He's just too strong for Shea. Shea's a good help defender, not as good as an individual defender. If it's Giddey, what happens there as well? Well, maybe, again, they could feel comfortable putting 2 on the ball against Luka. You blitz him hard early and force him to give the ball up to someone who's not right at the basket for an alley-oop, but is like on the short roll on a pocket pass, and Gafford, Lively, like they're going to make a play going downhill at Chet. Like, I don't know about that. Like Zubac, I thought caused them some problems in the last round, and the Thunder have a lot of athleticism to fly around once they are in a 2 on the ball situation. I also expect to see a lot of creativity from Mark Daigneault, particularly with this much time to prepare. And it was kind of obvious after a while that Dallas is going to win that series. So I think we're going to see some zone. We might even see, some like triangle and 2 type of shit. The one thing I would also really do if I were them is just trap Luka in the backcourt. Like we talked about with Brunson, actually, too. I think it's actually amazing how often that works to just trap someone in the backcourt and pass it.
I was going to bring up like the aggressive ball denials that I would be running on Luka, and that takes advantage of some of Lou Dort's doggedness. I think that he can, if you could get the ball out of Doncic's hands, the question of who's going to work harder to make that the rest of the possession work or fail, I think Dort's going to have some real advantages there. Now, there are ways for Dallas to succeed, particularly when Luka and Kyrie are on the floor together. But getting the ball out of Luka's hands, if you can do it and not create a 4-on-3 in the half court, all the better for it. I agree with you.
Well, and particularly if Kyrie is on the bench, then you got it. You absolutely have to do that, I would say. And we'll see if Mark Daigneault gets to that level of creativity. He also just has all these kind of little tricks of 2 for 1 and challenging. A little kid, I think, has been pretty good with the challenges of late, too. So I am very interested to see how that's going to go on defense. I think that in the end, well, let's talk about this first. With their starters, do you go Dort or do you go Jalen Williams on Luka?
I go Dort, personally.
Yeah, I think they will probably start that way. Well, and then, so you go Dort and then you're putting Jalen Williams on Kyrie to start?
Yes.
Yeah, I think they would both get you.
Well, and the other thing that I'd be doing with Shea is I like Shea as kind of an off-ball threatening guy. Is you can use Gilgeous-Alexander on Derek Jones Jr., who might be the primary defender on him in the first place, and then you use him as a steal guy, as a disruptor, help defender in those circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I would want to just get a feel for who works better. Like Dort, yeah, I think they only had one healthy matchup between these teams this year. And, Dort, like you think, okay, he's strong, but he doesn't really have great length. I don't know if I love him in isolation against Luca once Luca actually gets the ball. And now Dort maybe getting over a screen. I could see Luca drawing a bunch of fouls on Dort early as well. But because Dort doesn't have the longest arms, and like Luca's not going to be bothered the way Ingram was by like Dort getting into his body, right? Like
Correct.
Luca's just too strong. His handle is way better than Ingram's. Like he's too good to get just like pressured up and like taken out of his game the way like a Brandon Ingram was. But I think that the way the Thunder will end up closing games me with Case and Wallace. I think they'll
Sure.
I want to see how Case and Wallace does on Kyrie Irving. And then you probably would still have Dort on Luca, but if Dort is fouled out or something, maybe you don't go there. But then you still got Jalen Williams and Shea as help defenders on the back line next to Chet as well. When Chet's off the floor, that's when I think actually the Mavs are going to score pretty well in this series, because I think they're going to go Kenrich Williams. Well, then they're just not going to have a ton of rim protection, and Jalen Williams I think would probably get cooked too much in pick and roll. So that I think would be a trouble. Like, can Chet ramp it up to 38 minutes a game in this series? They definitely are not going to start that way. They didn't do that in the New Orleans series, despite how effective he was. But I think he's going to need to be really good. He was against New Orleans. This is a much different test of him in basically every way. Anything else you want to focus on with Dallas having the ball?
It isn't rigidly with Dallas having the ball, but the coaching disparity between these teams. We haven't really seen Mark Daigneault in many series, and they played a very short-handed Pelicans group. But I mean, you and I both picked him as a coach of the year. Jason Kidd is a better coach now than when we ranked him 30 at the exact moment he got fired back when he was with Milwaukee. But if I'm having to pick who's going to make better adjustments, who's going to bring better pre-series prep and in-series adjustments, that on offense and defense for me goes to the Thunder.
I think so, although I've really not had too many issues with Jason Kidd's playoff coaching. I think there are people who've had some issues with what's taken place like throughout the regular season, particularly last year. But I've struggled to see like some big mistakes that he's made. Like he's won. I guess they were the higher seed against Utah in 22, but he's won 2 series already as the lower seed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing we got to point to is transition.
Oh, yeah.
Luka getting back on defense, the Thunder running after makes. Like, I think it's going to be, particularly going up against the glacial pace of the Clippers, I think that it's the Mavs that'll probably have a little bit more of an adjustment, and particularly in that OKC cauldron, that just the pace in transition. And particularly if Luka, like the Thunder are going to like reach in a lot, they try to make plays, they try to get a lot of steals. I don't think that Dallas is necessarily going to turn it over that much. But on plays where Luka thinks he's fouled and he complains, he doesn't get back. If the big goes for the offensive rebound, then anytime the big is not back, the Dallas has no other rim protectors. Shea, Jalen Williams, even Josh Giddey are going to just go right to the basket. They can get some transition threes also. And yeah, I think if Dallas had a little bit more shooting, I might feel better about them in this series. But I think I'm going to make my pick here of Oklahoma City in 6 games.
If the Mavericks had their full complement of guys available and healthy, Kleba is a huge absence, and then we don't know what's going on with Luka's sprained knee. We don't have too many details what the sprain is, what ligament, what's going on, severity, anything like that. I was extremely confident that this was going to be a long series. The Mavs still present some real challenges for the Thunder. I'm between 6 and 5, but I am going to go with Thunder in 6 as well. I think that Luka's an unbelievable talent. He's a hard guy to adjust to. And the Thunder are going to be facing a different caliber opponent than the Pelicans squad that they dispatched in 4. So it wouldn't stun me if this was like, maybe one close and one comfortable Thunder win, and then you just kind of get that split in Dallas, and then it's functionally over. But I think Dallas has more talent than that. Kyrie Irving in crunch time, just that we didn't talk maybe enough about how great of an offensive player Kyrie Irving is, that's an established thing that we know about the league. And so, yeah, I'm going Thunder in 6, even if I could see it going 5.
Mitha says, in a way, Lively was traded for Case and Wallace. I mean, he basically was.
Yeah, it's not even in a way. It's pretty much the choice that Oklahoma City made.
And that's fascinating as well, because when is the last time a second round series had 3 rookies that are going to feature this prominently between Lively, Wallace, and then of course Chet is a little bit different story as a rookie. That's pretty remarkable. But I think OKC, especially with the way Minnesota's going, they've been a big story. I thought they looked awesome in the first round, and I think they're just going to have too much speed, too much depth, way too much two-way play. Like OKC just doesn't have as many one-way players as Dallas. Like that's the big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I do think Luka and Shea, like this will be fascinating for everyone in Dallas who was like aghast that anyone could think that the best player on the number 1 seed in the West might have a case to be ahead of Luka Doncic in the MVP voting. I thought that he was, although Luka made it close in the end. And if I had to pick who the best players in the NBA are, I would have Luka slightly above Shea. But this will be an interesting referendum on that to some degree. Hopefully Luka will be healthy enough that but like Luka, he's gonna have to play better than he played against the Clippers, like absolutely, otherwise they have no chance in the series. Like he's gonna need to be like obviously way better than Shea, and I really, particularly when you consider the shooting that the Thunder can bring to bear, I really don't love this matchup for Dallas's defense against Shea. I think because they don't have the ability to switch, and they just don't have that many different ways they can play, I think it's going to be a problem for them.
And also, it's not like you can zone up the Thunder or some of the other gimmicky stuff because they're too good at shooting.
All right, let's hit a few of these questions here. You still have to choose who you want to have as your subscription that we're doing. We're doing 2 of these throughout the second round. We do these on Sunday nights, and then either Wednesdays or Thursdays. We'll kind of pick whichever day is more interesting to do these live shows. So, Danny, while you're thinking about that selection, I'll take a couple. Al says, given how physical Valanciunas is, wouldn't not having to go against him maybe help Chet's stamina? Chet won't have to do like as much banging. Certainly, I do think that will help him to some degree. But for a guy who's never been in the playoff crucible, playing 40 minutes a game, like he had stamina in the sense that he played all 82. But I until a guy does it, and there's also fouls to think about as well. Until a guy does it, I'm not sure if he can. They will leave Giddey open for sure. That worked for them in their blowout win against the Thunder. And yeah, we'll see whether that happens this time. But I do think that they have other options that they can go to in this series if Josh Giddey is not working. Is Luka going bonkers? Dallas's only path to winning the series. I mean, maybe I'm just wrong about Dallas's defense against Oklahoma City's offense.
And also like Kyrie can carry them for stretches. And I mean, we saw games in the Clipper series where Dallas's support players can hit a bunch of threes. Dallas can generate those. I don't think it's their only path. I think it's the clearest path, but clearest and only aren't the same thing. I'm not necessarily picking this question, but we got one much earlier that we didn't answer, which I think it is an interesting question from Truth. Or was it from Truth? I just lost the name. It was basically about asking how the Magic get to be a high level contender. And it's hard to get from where they are. And the Magic are an extremely young team. But to me, the answer is that you need someone who could be the best player on that type of a team. And we've seen Shai Gilgeous-Alexander potentially make that ascendance. We've seen other guys do it. And so that's why Paolo Banchero is the centerpiece, because more often than not, you are not acquiring that player. Houston getting James Harden is a genuine rarity. And so if Paolo Banchero becomes somebody who can be a viable best player to a championship series, the Magic become a team that can make it to a conference finals and all of that. And if he doesn't, then maybe they can. It's harder to get there because not only is the ensemble route more difficult because you need everyone to stay healthy, it's also more difficult sometimes to keep the ensemble together because you think about all the iterations of like a LeBron team. Well, it's like the sort of support talent changed all the time, but they were still good. If you don't have a top 10, a top 5 player in the league, it's very hard to be that good with any consistency.
Yeah, and Paolo is their chance at that. It's very unlikely that they could trade for such a player, and they don't really have anything that's too amazing in their draft pick coffers going forwards either.
This is a good one from Iguana. What options do the Mavs have to replace Maxi Kleber? Would they resort to dusting off the corpse of Markieff Morris? Well, Markieff Morris can't defend at the 5. So you can't use him in that capacity. Could they play him a little bit the 4? Sure, but I don't know that Dallas desperately needs power forward minutes. What they need is a center who can simultaneously space the 4, space out Chet a little bit, and defend, because that duality is extremely hard to find. It's why almost all of the like pretenders to these thrones fail, is because their players, fail in one of these two capacities. So I don't think they have anyone who can do the most important thing that they do for Maxi Kleber. The supplementary power forward minutes, sure. I mean, you can try somebody, but I think the answer to that is just scale up some of the guys you already have in the rotation.
Let's see here. How do I expect Derek Jones Jr. to defend Shea? I think if it's just a straight up isolation, he could do okay. Now, where it gets a little bit more difficult is I don't know if Derek Jones Jr. is like the best communicator or like the absolute most intelligent defender. So if they start getting into some of that ghost screening action, Shea getting shifty, rejecting the screen. But I mean, Jones has that incredible wingspan. I did think he caused problems for the likes of PG. I would like to see what happens too if the Thunder really get into just more of a traditional pick and roll game. But I think more likely they're going to do it more with smaller players. They have Luka as a possibility to go after and try to wear him down and blow by him. And so I think that'll be more of the approach. But I would like to see Chet setting some more screens for Shea. We just haven't seen a ton of that so far. But I think they just have so many options and so many guys who can screen, so many guys who can attack off the dribble, that I think it's going to be really hard for Dallas to defend them with kind of, okay, we got Luka and Kyrie, and we got one wing stopper, we got a power forward who's kind of okay, and we got a center who will stand there and protect the rim. Like that, I just don't think that's going to get it done. All right, you want to pick who your gift subscription of the week is?
Yes, we're working through everything right now. If you have one that you want to nominate too,
yeah, let's do it. Let's do Truth W here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, he's had some. I assume it's he. Sometimes it's not. Had some really good comments. So yeah, Dunc'd On Prime at gmail.com. Go ahead and send an email, and we'll hook you up with a year of Dunc'd On Prime. Thanks so much for being so supportive, all of you who are listening, and we're hoping to build this channel up. So we appreciate the comments and the likes and all that, and tell your friends, etc. We'll talk to y'all tomorrow on Playback. We'll do the end of Indiana, New York if it's close, and then a pivotal game to Denver, Minnesota, and then, of course, talk about it on Dunc'd On Prime after that's all over. Till then.